We push the record button, which I always forget to do. So again, just to summarize, we as human beings have been adding CO2 and other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. We're changing the composition of the atmosphere. I think in one of the videos you heard the term anthropogenic, right? Anthropogenic means caused by human beings, right? So we as human beings are changing the composition of the atmosphere by the results of us burning fossil fuels. That changes in the composition of the atmosphere means that the Earth's atmosphere is heating up. So the average temperatures on the Earth are increasing. We've increased the Earth's temperature by just over 1 degree Celsius since the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1750 or 1780, right? Remember, world leaders in Paris set a goal of 1.5 degree of warming. So we unfortunately are getting painfully close to that. So if we warm up the Earth's atmosphere, we affect the weather. We have more extreme weather events, more hurricanes, just like Hurricane Ida that we saw a couple weeks ago. We're melting glaciers and polar ice caps. We're raising the sea level. We're altering patterns of rainfall. We're having more intense storms. All those sorts of things are happening because of human-caused changes in the Earth's atmosphere. We played this video last week. In essence, vested. When I say vested interests, in the case of climate change, it has to do with companies that sell oil and gas and gasoline, fossil fuel companies. It's in their interest to delay action on climate change so they can continue to sell us gasoline and all the other fossil fuels that we use. And if you remember from the movie, the way that they do it is by creating doubt. They're essentially selling doubt as a product, and creating doubt makes it harder to convince the general public that changes need to be made. I'm admittedly a geek here. I read the paper. Good evening, Kevin. We're just getting started. I read the paper just about every day. I'm always looking for things that relate to the stuff that I'm going to talk about in this class. So this past week there was a lot of stuff in the newspaper about climate change. Right, in this case, a House panel, House of Representatives, sent out a note to the oil and gas industry. The House Oversight Committee has widened its inquiry into the oil and gas industry's role in spreading disinformation about the role of fossil fuels in causing global warming. Right, so the Congress wants to know what role did oil companies play in keeping us from making changes, spreading doubt and disinformation. So from the UN, of catastrophic pathways, right? Just like, remember my slides, same thing a couple of years ago. The scientists warned that we're not making changes, we're not making changes fast enough, right? Countries made pledges after Paris, and they're not enough, right? We're making pledges, and those pledges aren't serious enough, aren't making a big enough change to stave off the worst impacts of climate change. Right, our president, or our new president, our current president, seems to get it. He's saying the right things, right? We don't have much more than 10 years, right? I said that the coming decade is the decade that we really have to make some changes. Remains to be seen whether the Congress will go along with the things that Biden and the Democrats want to do. In our state, in the state of Illinois, our Governor Pritzker just signed a bill this last week or 2 weeks ago that does some of the things that governments need to do to help us in the transition to renewable energy. Tyler and the folks that are in the renewable energy program will be happy to know that the Illinois SRECs, you know, the governmental support for installation of renewable energy or photovoltaic systems, that those SRECs got put back in place again, which is good. And the state government also set a timeline for getting fossil fuels out of the electrical generation system, right? So they would get rid of, you know, stop using coal and natural gas to generate electricity. We'll see what that means in just a minute. Yeah, great news, Tyler. You could ask when you I think you're in your second year, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, if you go to your next class, you could ask about it, because I'm pretty sure the IBEW folks are going to know all about this, right? Because this had been kind of stalling the solar business in Illinois, right? Companies were uncertain about whether these incentives would be put back in place. So again, our state did something that was good. I'm going to play a video here. It's actually somewhat dated, right? It's from a couple of years ago when the previous president, President Trump, was still in office. But the point that it makes is still valid, right? Climate change is a problem that's been created largely by the actions of the rich countries of the global north, the developed world. You know, global north means countries like the United States and Canada and Great Britain and European countries, right? We are the ones, we as the global north are the ones that have historically put the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Remember, I said that the US is responsible for 25%, 1/4 of historic carbon dioxide emissions. Currently, those impacts, you know, those climate changes are being felt largely by poor folks in Africa and other developing countries in the global south. And I think the point of this is to make us pause and think about, you know, what responsibility we have to our fellow human beings. So let me play this and see if I can do it without
does climate change look like?
Are you guys not seeing the video here?
Major rivers have vanished into
Oh,
puddles.
no, I forgot it. Sorry, my bad. No,
The
hold
few
on.
wells have dirty water.
I will start it
And the
again. That was
cows,
my mistake.
representing the wealth of villagers, their bank accounts for emergencies are being sold off because they too are starving. For
I
people
will go
like
back and
Andrina,
rewind
there's no
here.
debate.
Sorry about that, folks.
It's almost nightfall. Every evening, starving kids go out to get dinner. Climate change has devastated this place. Now there's only one food in sight: cactus. For the children, wild and prickly cactus fruit. Basically no nutrition. When there's no fruit, they turn to the raw cactus itself. And for the most desperate, chalky ash mixed with water. So where does our next president stand on climate change?
I'm not a big believer in man-made climate change. There could be some impact, but I don't believe it's devastating.
It'll get cooler, it'll get warmer. It's called weather.
We're going to cancel the Paris Climate Agreement.
Nobody really knows. Look, I'm somebody that gets it. And nobody really knows. It's not something that's so hard and fast.
I'm Nicholas Kristof in southern Madagascar. President-elect Trump may be in denial about climate change, so I came to see its impact for myself. I've seen hunger all around the world. In some countries, it's because of government corruption. In others, warlords. But here, where it hasn't rained properly in years, the ultimate culprit is climate change. And the West's myopia and passivity about climate are destroying lives across a belt of drought-afflicted southern Africa. A generation ago, this land was lush. Crops, flowers, forests. Now, due to a combination of El Nino and climate change, it's a desert wasteland. This drought in 7 countries hasn't received much attention. Comment ça va? But according to the UN, it's left 1.3 million children malnourished. Severely acutely malnourished. By a huge margin, severely acutely malnourished. Severe acute malnutrition. You see that his arms are like sticks. So what does climate change look like? Major rivers have vanished into puddles. The few wells have dirty water. And the cows, representing the wealth of villagers, their bank accounts for emergencies, are being sold off because they too are starving. For people like Hondrana, there's no debate. Do you believe the climate here is changing? Hondrana has 6 grandchildren. All of them are malnourished. None has ever had a bath. She's 76 and says this drought is unprecedented. Here's the paradox of climate change. It's mainly caused by affluent people, people like us. And those who suffer the most are the poor and vulnerable. Have you ever heard the name Donald Trump? I believe actually you know more than he does about some things because you understand that climate change is happening. Hondrana is one of the lucky ones. In another village, I met Fukandraza and his brother, Boriavi. A year ago, their parents left to find food and jobs. call them climate orphans. Have you eaten today? Have you drunk water today? They now live with their aunt, Fideline, but she can hardly afford to feed her own kids. With severe acute malnutrition, these boys are at risk of dying. Voriavi can't stay awake during our interview. But I don't blame the aunt. The situation is more my fault than hers. Slowly, the social fabric is being pulled apart. There are millions of kids just like Fokandraza and Voriavi. Their trauma runs deep. It'll carry over and impede growth for generations to come. At most schools, kids are dropping out to scrounge for food. But before I left, I stumbled upon a bit of hope. This small school. Enrollment has soared by more than 50% in 1 year. But why are kids going to school? To eat. The World Food Program offers free meals. I've seen these school feeding programs all over the world. And at 25 cents per day per child, they fight starvation and keep kids in school.
Ary tsy afaka hanapatapaka reka satria misy kantiny scolaire ho sakafoaniny eo. Ny toetsain'ny zaza lasa mahiratsy.
But it's a temporary fix. Real systemic change means investing in climate and putting a price on carbon. Let's not forget, these problems are caused by your car and mine. Donald Trump can pretend that climate change is still up for debate. But as long as we defer action, kids in places like this will continue to starve and die.
Yeah, I'm not meaning to be or trying not to be over dramatic here, but just trying to dramatize the point that, you know, the results of what we in the developed world are doing have much more of an impact on other folks around the globe, that others are feeling the impacts of this much more than we are currently. And unfortunately, you know, we haven't been mobilized to take action as of yet, right? We caused the problem. Others are feeling the effects of the problem. You know, do we have a responsibility to other folks on the globe, right? Right? Are we responsible? I think I showed these same two graphs last week, right? With CO2 emissions going up and global CO2 concentrations going up. I could put temperatures on there as well. All three of these all kind of track the same direction, right? So the science is clear, right? That our former President Trump said we don't know. Well, we do know, right? The scientists are almost unanimous about what's going on here, right? And we know what we have to do as construction professionals. Unfortunately, just like the vaccine, you know, the science around climate change is still politicized. So I believe that we need to focus on the things that are within our control, things that we can do, right? So that's what we're going to learn about this semester. So we saw the plan for net zero, and some of these are big changes, right? No new fossil fuel in buildings by 2025, right? What does that mean? That means that we're going to heat our buildings with heat pumps rather than boilers. You know, we're not going to have gas dryers. We're not going to have gas stoves and ovens, right? Those are big changes, but we have to get fossil fuel out of buildings, right? All new buildings net zero ready. I think hopefully I'll get to it tonight and tell you what net zero means, but essentially we make the building efficient enough that renewables on site can generate the energy required for that building. And that, along with things that lots of other folks are going to do in other swim lanes, we're going to reduce carbon by 50% by the year 2030. And moving on from there, we install efficient appliances. No, that would be both, Matthew. Yeah, good question. Yeah, we're trying to get these things applied to both commercial and residential construction. Again, these are big changes. And I think we can do, as you'll see in a couple slides, we can do these things on a one-off basis. We have to figure out how to do it not on one or two projects, but on every project, right? That's our challenge. The other big challenge is that we have to figure out how to retrofit the existing stock of buildings, right? We have lots and lots of homes and buildings that are already built that need to be made more efficient as well, right? They all need to be retrofitted. So we got to figure all this stuff out. So again, these are all things that we as construction professionals, I changed it to must do, right? We have to do these things if we're going to play our part in getting to these goals of net zero carbon, right? Decarbonization is a process of getting fossil fuels out of our buildings and our energy systems. And basically 3 pillars in the case of buildings, right? Energy efficiency, making the building as the building envelope and the building systems and equipment in the building as efficient as it possibly can be made. And once we do that, then we have the possibility of meeting the needs of energy for that building with on-site renewables or potentially off-site renewables. And electrification means that we are substituting electric sources of energy for things that were fossil fuels, right? So heat pumps instead of boilers, heat pumps instead of gas-fired hot water heaters, induction cooktops rather than stoves, et cetera, et cetera. But the key is that we have to make things efficient. The building envelope has to be efficient. And then if we do that, then we have a shot of getting at those things with electric heat pumps, right? Here's another 3 pillars, a slide that I cribbed from something else, from another, someone else's presentation. Again, efficiency, electrification, no on-site fossil fuels, and renewable energy, right? Get the carbon out of our buildings. The good news for us is that, none of this stuff needs to be invented. We already have these technologies. We have all the things that we need to get here. We don't have to wait for something magical to be invented. It's already here. We know how to make, we'll see Passive House in a couple of weeks. We know how to make buildings with extremely high levels of insulation. We know how to do that already, right? Our challenge is really we have to do it at scale. So when I say scale, I mean not just a few projects, but every building, every project, right? We have to apply these approaches to everything that we do. Obviously, we'll do our part, but we can't do it alone, right? The government has to do things to support our efforts to encourage our business to move along, right? Mandate reductions in electric grid carbon, sometimes called renewable portfolio standards. We just saw that, I showed you that Governor Pritzker just signed a bill here in Illinois that does that. So we're on the way, perhaps not aggressive enough, but a step in the right direction. We certainly need stronger building codes. We'll talk about building codes here in a couple of weeks. Certainly there are building codes out there that talk about net zero ready buildings, right? That stuff needs to be adopted by every municipality, right? There are a few places in the country that are starting to talk about not allowing new fossil fuel in buildings. That has to happen everywhere. And certainly something that the government can do is make sure that we stop supporting fossil fuel development. Any questions? Sorry, this lecture hung over from last week, but I wanted to get to the end of it. Yeah, good question. Yeah, net zero can be done. When you get here, I'll try to find some good examples, Matthew. But yeah, net zero, efficiency, all these ideas can apply to all different building types. So we'll talk about both. Okay. Let me switch gears here. There we go. I have a folder on Blackboard that's entitled Knowledge Sharing Assignment. This will be one of our major assignments this semester. I think I used to call it a book report assignment, but I decided to change the name because, doing book reports may have a negative connotation in some people's minds, so I changed it to knowledge sharing, but it'll be the same thing, right? So why would we do something like this? Well, we do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want to practice your skills at gathering information. Certainly want to help build the habit of reading for information. Hopefully you learn something new and educate your classmates. Practice your public speaking skills. I know it's a little hard to practice public speaking in a virtual environment. It's one thing to squawk into your video on your computer. It's a whole other thing to stand up in front of a classroom. But I have to do the best we can with our current situation. So what I'm asking you to do is to choose a book on any sustainability related or green building design related topic. On Blackboard under the folder that says knowledge sharing assignment, I have a list of books up there. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but I've been trying to collect books that I think are good. There's an assignment up for book choice. So make sure of your book choice Blackboard, and I will take a look at it and let you know if that's appropriate before you read. If I get multiple requests, then first come, first serve. If you need help, by all means reach out. I can make suggestions, talk to you about what interests you. Hopefully you find something that will interest you and you'll want to learn more about. So you're going to choose a book, write a report, right? So I really want you to be able to share what you learned with your classmates. What did you learn? What will you know? What might you possibly do differently, either in your personal life or your professional career, based on what you learned? So that's a written report. Again, I'll have to figure out how to do this with a large group, 20-some students virtually, but I can make you presenters and you can run through your slides. We'll figure it out. I slid back the due date for the book choice since I didn't get to this last week. So 2 weeks hence is when I'd like you to have chosen your book, right? Because you need time to read it and reflect upon it and think about it and write about it and be prepared to present. Yep. Sorry, I should have changed my slides here. Yeah, there are. Triton does have books on green architecture and sustainability. You'll have to go ask. I think last year when I did this class, they had books out in a rack in the library, and when we did our tour, I pointed out that the rack of sustainability and green architecture books. When I went back to the library before our tour a couple of weeks ago, I noticed that they weren't there, which is why I didn't point them out. But certainly you can go there and ask what they have, and they can help you out. I don't know if this woman still works there or not, but she was the reference librarian who supported us in the architecture department. But you certainly can go there and ask for help and find a book. The other resource that you have available to us, or one of the other resources you have available to you is you can search for books at other college and university libraries. Right, so I gave you I know it's always easier said than done, but there's a quick links on the Triton website that gets you to the library. And then if you have your Triton ID number, you can log in to this system, and then you can search for books as well. Again, the trick here is that if it's coming from another library, you have to put a hold on it, and that book has to come from someplace else. So make sure you give yourself some time. I know I have a library card in Oak Park. So in the library system in the western suburbs, you can have the same sort of system in Oak Park. I can search for a book and put a hold on it, and it comes to my library. And you can certainly find stuff on Amazon as well, but I'm hoping that you can use some of these resources and borrow a book rather than have to go out and buy something. But any questions? Everyone's quiet tonight. So yeah, I would encourage you to get moving on this. Again, if you want some suggestions, you can look at the list of books or just send me an email or text, and we can talk about it. I'll certainly help you find something. But I would encourage you to not delay, don't put it off. Start looking around. Okay. Okay, I have a short lecture here which I will run through before break. The topic is greenwashing, right? We may have heard what whitewashing means. Greenwashing is, as we see, is where companies are trying to deceive us about the credentials of their products and services. So let's take a look and see what that means. Right, we saw on the earlier in the semester that some of the terms like natural and green and energy efficient, those are terms that are thrown about quite often by companies in relation to goods and services and advertisements. And there's not always a clear understanding of what that actually means. Right? If some of you happen to have a bottle of bottled water, you may have this symbol on the side of it. What does that really mean? Does that mean you can recycle this plastic bottle? Does that symbol make it more likely to think that it will be recyclable, right? Does that deceive you into thinking that, oh, that single-use plastic bottle isn't such a bad thing because it's got that that arrow symbol on it, it must be okay, right? So what does that symbol really mean? Well, if you dig into it, you'll find that it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Yeah, does it? Can you recycle this plastic in your bottle in your city and town? Where does the plastic actually end up? Those are hard questions to ask, right? It's, you know, you have to click on the link and look at a bunch of websites and try to figure out whether that plastic bottle is actually recyclable in your town. How many consumers are actually going to do this? Probably not many. You're just going to say, well, you know, I feel good about, yeah, it's got that little symbol on it, so maybe I just go ahead and buy that single-use plastic bottle. It can't be all bad, right? So this is a corporation trying to deceive you about the recyclability of plastic. So let me play this video here. I was going to do it the first week and we didn't quite get around to it, so let me play it now. And before I do that, let me shut the sharing up correctly, which I failed to do last time. My apologies. Oops.
Recycling is pretty easy.
So I throw the bottle into the blue bin.
The blue bin in the recycling bin.
They throw it into some kind of truck.
All sorted, nice and neat.
It goes to a separate place.
To a plastic recycling plant.
To a factory. Something akin to the end of Toy Story 3 where they're all heading to this big incinerator.
And then I imagine that there's some large machine that just squishes everything together.
Everything then is melted down.
It's somehow melted.
Maybe they melt down the plastic or something.
From there, it can be reshaped into sheets of plastic.
Like a park bench.
You hear about sneakers being turned into basketball court.
And that turns into new things.
Recycling.
Turns out that's not the whole truth, especially for plastic. This is actually propaganda we've been spoon-fed since we were kids in commercial after commercial.
People start pollution. People can stop it.
Who's behind a lot of this messaging? The industry that produces plastic and the retailers who sell it to us. And it makes perfect sense that they'd want to trick us into thinking we can use as much plastic as we want, so long as we recycle. Why not pass the responsibility for a big corporate mess onto individuals like you and me? But here's the big secret. Entire categories of papers and plastics are rarely recycled. Of 7 types of plastic that people put into blue bins, 5 whole categories hardly ever get recycled at all. According to the EPA, in 2017, as little as 8.4% of our discarded plastic went through that magic recycling process. What happened to the rest? You probably guessed it. Minus the plastic that ends up in the ocean. To make it worse, we used to export 1/3 of our recycling, a whopping 20 million tons a year, and pay countries like China to deal with it for us. That game's over. China's basically told us no more, followed by the Philippines and Malaysia. This recycling shutout has caused hundreds of American municipalities to cut down or totally cancel their recycling programs. In Eugene, Oregon,
We can't even recycle our milk cartons or our yogurt containers anymore.
you might be thinking, if so little is actually getting recycled, why does everything we buy seem to have that symbol on it? Great question. Let's ask the FTC. That's the entity set up to protect American consumers like you and me by setting rules on consumer labeling. But their guidelines around recycling are a bit confusing. Basically, to earn this symbol, 60% of the people who buy that product should be able to recycle it, which seems to mean 60% of buyers of that product would live in a place that can break down and reuse that thing. But then it gets more complicated. Like if a shower curtain package says recyclable, but either the curtain or the package isn't recyclable, then that's considered deceptive. But if it's a bottle instead of a curtain and it's the cap instead of the package that's not recyclable, then it's totally fine unless the bottle has a non-recyclable wrapping or is contaminated with food. Is anyone else totally lost here? With such complicated regulations, companies can get away with stamping a recyclable label on products that aren't likely to be recycled. Like this, or even this. And most of us wouldn't even know. But somehow Kathleen Smith figured it out. Kathleen is a resident of Northern California. She loves coffee, so much so that her grandkids call her Grandma Coffee. And she loves being eco-friendly, so someone gifted her a Keurig machine. The pods had that nice little recycling symbol, and the box even said, "Have your cup and recycle it too." But those pods weren't actually recyclable. She took Keurig to court to sue them for false advertising. Keurig changed some of its labels, but then they tried to dismiss the case, essentially claiming what had happened hadn't hurt Kathleen. But the court disagreed. Kathleen could have been hurt if she was misled and paying more for something she thought was recyclable. And now a whole bunch of other Kathleens are lining up in a potential class action suit against Keurig. This lawsuit might eventually cause one company to clean up its act. But short of millions of crusading Kathleens in court cases, how are we going to clean up the entire plastic-pushing industry? What we really need is the FTC to write some clear regulations and introduce costly penalties. And we need companies to stop hiding behind their green marketing ploys and actually deal with the plastic crisis they created. Now you may be thinking, so should I not even bother recycling anymore? The point of this video is not to take all the responsibility off of individuals like you and me. Please keep recycling stuff that's recyclable. But we've been made to feel that as long as we put our plastic in the blue bin, we've done our part, and that's just not true. The best thing we can really do is start buying as if nothing gets recycled. Because that's pretty much what's going on.
It's ridiculous that we had to pull this out of the trash can for this video.
Okay, yeah, let me go back to my slides here. I think when I had this in my presentation the first week, we were talking about recycling. In this case, I was trying to show that corporations are deceiving us. Right? They're playing a trick on us. They're making us think that their products are something, that their product has attributes that it might not really have, right? Here's the key ideas. Many plastics are not being recycled. We used to send a lot of our plastic waste to other countries. China and lots of other countries in Southeast Asia no longer take our wastes. Right? It's harder for plastics to be recycled. Recycling symbol on the package implies that it can be recycled. Most often that is not the case. This is deceptive greenwashing on the part of corporations. Right? So you have to be thoughtful. You have to try to look past this stuff. Right, here's another one. I was, for some reason, when I freshened these slides up a couple years ago, I was looking at bottled water. Right, here's another Ice Mountain spring water. Right, you're looking at their advertisement. You might think, oh, that's a natural source. That's a good thing, right? But looking a little deeper, you find that this company is withdrawing awful lot of water from a natural source and bottling it up and sending it out, impacting the folks around their water source that have wells that are drying up because they're withdrawing so much water. Does Ice Mountain want you to think about all this stuff? No, of course not. They want you to look at this great advertisement and buy their product. So what is greenwashing? Greenwashing is companies' a coordinated attempt to hide unpleasant facts, especially in a political context. That's whitewashing. Greenwashing is the same thing, but we're looking at it from an environmental point of view. It's greenwashing when a company or organization spends more time and money claiming to be green through advertising and marketing than actually implementing business practices that minimize its environmental impact. Right? They're saying they're a good company, but they're not really doing anything. Right? So I have a couple sins of greenwashing. Right? What are some of the things that companies do? Right? That recycling symbol is a good example of greenwashing. Right? The nice picture of the mountain stream is an example of greenwashing, right? So here are some other examples. Right, dirty business, touting an environmental program or product while the corporation's product or core business is inherently polluting or unsustainable. Right, so obviously if you see a fossil fuel company touting their green credentials when their core business is taking fossil fuels out of the ground and producing carbon dioxide, right, that would certainly make me suspicious. Right, Adbuster, right, using targeted advertising and public relations campaigns to exaggerate an environmental achievement in order to divert attention away from environmental problems, right? So if I had a good question. Unfortunately, there are not, right? You saw in that advertisement that the Federal Trade Commission or the FTC, regulates deceptive practices by companies, and like lots of things that our government does, yeah, we have some regulations that do some things, but probably aren't really effective at getting to the root of the problem. So, yes and no. Should companies be able to deceive us? No, of course they should not be able to deceive us. Do they get away with it a lot of the times? Yes, unfortunately they do. Right, political spin, advertising or speaking about corporate green commitments while actively lobbying against pending or current environmental laws and regulations, right? So in other words, you might have a company talking about all the great things they're doing, and yet they're spending money in Washington to argue against or lobby against something that runs against their interest. It's the law, stupid. Advertising or branding a product with environmental achievements that are already required or mandated by existing laws, right? Taking credit for something that they already have to do, right? These are some examples of greenwashing. So there is, I think it's under week 4, a new discussion board assignment. Again, this is new for me this year. I used to do these as, put some stuff on a PowerPoint and send it to me. I'm trying to give you the opportunity to respond to your classmates. So again, look around, think about these things, find some examples of greenwashing in a product or service, government or corporate communication, or other sources where you suspect the advertiser or seller of the product is not telling the whole truth, right? It shouldn't be too hard. So again, take a look, post it on the discussion board, respond to other people's posts. I'm trying to, this was a training we as Triton faculty took to try to make our virtual learning, somewhat like a classroom experience. So you'll have discussion boards like this throughout the semester. Any questions? Again, this is up under week number 4. So please get after it. Okay, well, we are close to the top of the hour here. Let's take a 10-minute break or so. So we will get back going at 5 after, and we will start getting closer to the world of LEED. So we'll see you back in a few.